Hi! So Rayllum is canon again. They're smooching and cuddling all over the damn planet, and it has been an amazing journey to see them return to how they were before. But how did it happen? How did Callum and Rayla successfully rekindle their relationship after such a drastic separation? In this video, I want to discuss the events that caused Rayllum to be canon once again, focusing mainly on the actions of Rayla herself, while also putting an emphasis on Callum as well, but not as much as Rayla. We will go through each significant scene and break it down, discussing how and why it contributed to their rekindled relationship. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. You can also join my Discord server if you like, filled with tons of other TDP fans. So let's get into it. For those who are unaware, Callum and Rayla were a thing for only about a month after Season 3 concluded. We know this because in the beginning of Season 1, Callum tells Soren that he'll be 15 in 2 months, and the events of the first 3 seasons takes place over the span of roughly 3 weeks to a month. The events that split them up and through the moon occurred on Callum's birthday, meaning it had been 2 months since they first met, and a month since they got together, roughly. But during that time together, we can actually gather that it may not have been the warm, peaceful bliss that one would imagine a healthy relationship to be. Let me explain. In Through the Moon, we can see that Rayla is constantly struggling about the idea of Viren still being alive, and wondering what truly happened to her family and wanting to see them again. In Through the Moon, Callum tells Rayla that he hates seeing her like this, which, to me, implies that this wasn't the first time she vented about her feelings on the matter. Now, venting is all well and good, of course, and Callum most likely allowed it, but it all came to head during Through the Moon, where it caused an argument that left both of them winded. Callum tries to help her, which led to Rayla going through the Moon Nexus portal and discovering the possibility that Viren was in fact still alive, or at least a potential future threat. And well, we all know what happened next. 2 years later, she comes back, and she quickly learned that Callum wasn't exactly going to let her back into his life with open arms. There were many conflicting feelings on his side, lots of confusion about how he should feel, which he tells Ezrin in the Drakewood when they're alone together. This conflict within Callum dominates his emotions towards Rayla for most of Season 4, but eventually, things begin to get better, starting with their teamwork on rescuing Zim from the Earthblood Elves. Slowly, over time, Callum warms up to Rayla again, initiating contact, comforting her, confiding in her, and eventually hugging her, telling her how happy he was that she came back to him. So let's look at some of these interactions. Let's shift gears a little and focus only on those interactions. Do you notice anything about them? Do you notice anything about what I just said? They were all initiated by Callum, not Rayla. This is the major point I want to focus on in this video: Rayla's patience. Rayla understood quite quickly that Callum was conflicted about her. She realized that things were not the same as they were before she left, and she also realized that it was not within her right to assume or initiate anything with Callum unless he did so first. His feelings towards her, for lack of a better term, brought them down from the level of a couple to just friends, I would say. I wouldn't argue that they ever technically broke up, at least not in the modern day terminology, but they certainly weren't official again either. They were in a sort of stranger limbo, not dating but not broken up either. But they still did love each other. This was apparent. They still had fond feelings. Callum just needed time to figure out how to act on those feelings again, whether or not it was appropriate to, and whether or not it was within his self-interest and self-respect to act on those actions again because of what she did to him. And Rayla understood this. To an insane degree, she understood this. As we look through these scenes, I want you to remember this. Rayla only reciprocated Callum's initiations the entire time, from Season 4 up to them becoming official again in Season 6. Focus on how she acted towards him, based on his actions towards her. The first scene we will look at is this one. After Rayla gave up her butterfly blades to Rex Igneous, Callum places a hesitant, but gentle hand on her shoulder, and keeps his eyes on hers when she meets his gaze. Not one episode later, Rayla is reciprocating the gesture by placing a hand on his shoulder after Callum saved Ezrin's life from Dragonfire. He comforts her after she thought she lost Soren. He confides in her about his fears of possession. Although, admittedly, I don't really like Rayla's reply here, but at the same time, I can understand the bewilderment that she probably felt in that moment, hearing her lover ask to be killed by her hand. She likely assumed he was being dramatic, but I digress. Next, we learn that Viren is actually alive, that Rayla's instincts in leaving in the first place were not without merit. Callum immediately understands that Rayla was actually right, and this time, he lets Rayla go after Viren on his own volition. Now, of course, comes the moment that changed their entire dynamic, the Season 4 finale hug. This hug, which was, again, initiated by Callum, was a major turning point. As I said, Rayla only reciprocated what Callum initiated. If Callum gave Rayla a romantic gesture, she would take it as a green light to employ said gesture in the future at a later date. Every time. Callum saying that he was glad Rayla came back has multiple meanings. It refers both to her returning to him now in that moment after he had thought he lost her again, as well as referring to her returning to him in the first place after 2 years. She came back to him, and her leaving again made Callum realize just how much his love for her, his need for her in his life, and his desire to be with her overpowered his negative views about her from before. From this moment on, Callum was ready to let her back into his life with warm, open arms. But just because they hugged does not mean that Callum's conflict vanished. They still needed to take things slow. Moving on to Season 5, they quickly established boundaries and trust with one another, which was huge, especially since it was a direct verbal statement from Callum himself. He trusts her unconditionally, saying it right to Opeli's face, even after everything she had done regarding the snooping around and breaking into his office to go to the catacombs. Some people take this as Callum being a pushover, but I disagree strongly. Sure, some aspect of us wants us to know that Rayla will never repeat those actions again. If we were in Callum's shoes, we would want her to apologize. Maybe. But at the same time, we aren't in Callum's shoes. We are not Callum. Callum has his own feelings about her, and he's allowed to feel how he wishes. If he decided to forgive her, it's not because he's a pushover. Hell, I'd say it's the exact opposite. It's because he knows his own desires, and he respects himself enough to make that decision for himself. Obviously, Callum could not hear the voices of the fan base begging him to ask Rayla for an apology, but even if he could, which would be terrible for anybody to endure, I think, I doubt his conclusions about her would change very much, if at all. Now, moving on to the second episode, this episode was very much Rayllum dominated. They go on their journey to Luxaria, and along the way, they share many nice moments, compromising and debating on their next move, letting one another decide things, which leads to their stay at the inn, but there's one scene in particular that I want to focus on, the stargazing clip. This is the first time we see Rayla initiate something first. I said before that Callum's negative feelings toward her had faded, but his confusion still remained, and this scene shows it in full display. Up until this point, Callum had initiated virtually every big romantic act, but here, Rayla leans on his shoulder in a comforting, romantic gesture herself. And Callum gets quite spooked. This scene right here is the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. It showcases what could have happened had Rayla been less patient with him. Had Rayla initiated things like this earlier when he was still upset, this reaction could have been amplified to a very negative degree, I think. Right now, Callum just doesn't really know what's happening. He's not just nervous about a pretty girl leaning on his shoulder, he's confused as to what he should do. He doesn't know how to feel. The conflicting emotions arise in his face, and you can literally see them in this shot. Luckily, this act was quickly reciprocated by Callum once he realized that this is what he wanted to begin with. He wanted her again. That closeness. You could see the moment his mind came to that conclusion, and the bliss on both of their faces is apparent as hell. But there is still an underlying weirdness to them, because despite everything that's happened so far, Rayla is hiding something, and I'm about to tell you why this was the best choice she could have possibly made. After working together to make it to Luxaria in one piece, they arrive at the Great Bookery. And here comes the second scene that made me want to make this video. As I mentioned in the start of this discussion, the younger, less emotionally stable Rayla would constantly air to Callum about her parents and Renan. However, Rayla is now 18 years old. She's grown up a considerable amount, both physically and emotionally, and Callum has too. At the end of Season 4, Rayla gets her parents and Renan back from Claudia in the form of cursed coins. Rayla made the choice to actually hide this from everyone around her, including Callum, which did cause some confusion early on, but it was also the direct cause of the establishment of boundaries in the first episode. And it was also the cause of this scene. In my opinion, this scene showcases the biggest difference in Callum and Rayla's maturity level out of any other scene in the entirety of the second arc. The past Rayla, prone to erring and venting constantly, is now standing before Callum asking for his consent before letting him in on the secret about the coins. She undoubtedly remembers the argument she had with him through the moon. She remembers and likely realizing how much her venting strained him. So now, Rayla asks for his consent. This gives Callum the chance to do and say whatever he wishes. And what he says is probably the most Callum thing he could have possibly said.
I would do anything for you.
With that consent, Rayla now feels that she can let Callum in on the secret that had been haunting her since the end of the 4th season. She tells Callum about the coins, and of course, Callum instantly tries to help. But once again, we can see just how much Rayla has matured, as she states that she knows the mission comes first, and that they could all rely on her to stay focused on the mission. A huge difference from the 15-year-old Rayla that people often overlook when they decide to hate on her. You know who you are. But then, right after that, we reach yet another moment where Callum initiates something slightly romantic. He takes her hands in his own, gently handling them, no pun intended, and softly places the coins back into her hand before calmly closing them. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that Callum had held her hand since she came back. This scene was amazing, and the build-up to it was even more eye-opening for Rayla. She would have likely been content to just keep the secret of her parents for as long as she felt necessary. But after her discussion with Callum's aunt Amaya regarding her feelings towards being strong alone versus being strong together, she realized that Callum could, and probably should, know. This scene not only displayed yet another moment of affection and initiation on Callum's part, but also an immense amount of trust on both of their parts. Rayla trusting Callum with the knowledge of her parents, and Callum trusting Rayla to tell him about them in the first place, as a callback to the first episode.
But hopefully soon. I am curious.
And one might think that this would be the biggest Rayla moment of this episode, but in my opinion, there is one more moment that takes the cake. This scene is absolutely beautiful. No other words for it. Many people first saw this and assumed that Callum had completely put aside his own feelings of anger towards her, and that this somehow showed that Callum had lost all his self-respect. Once again, being called a pushover. And let me tell you, they couldn't be more wrong if they tried. Callum saying he was wrong does not mean that he believes Rayla was right in her decision to leave him, but rather, it's Callum expressing his guilt about his own feelings towards Rayla when she first came back. Ultimately, despite what she did, and despite all his initial confusion, all that mattered to him deep down was that she was alive and safe. And Callum saying he was wrong was him acknowledging his own regrets on how he treated her. Granted, the way he treated her may have been justified and deserved for how she left him, but Callum is a much different person than many of those who question why he doesn't stay mad or demand an apology. It's clear that he doesn't need one, even if he's entitled to it. And by the way, I'm not just saying this baselessly. I basically just paraphrased what Aaron has himself said about the situation. This was paraphrased nicely from a Real James interview by Words with Dragons. After they escaped that situation, their relationship coming back was practically all but guaranteed. Over the course of the next episode, where they go to see Akiyu, we see yet another moment where Callum reaches for her hand and holds it, telling her that they would go into the water together, which was the overarching theme of Amaya's Listen to Rayla. Stronger together. As a couple. Well, almost a couple. Other than a few more small moments like Rayla catching Callum after he collapses from exhaustion, for example, nothing substantial really happens until Finnegran's Wake. Finnegran's Wake is one of the most interesting episodes in the entire series for me. Not only does it show just what Callum meant by doing anything for Rayla, but we also actually have some deleted lines given to us by Devin Gill herself, the writer of the episode, where Finnegran uses the word love on multiple occasions to describe Callum's feelings to Rayla while he's being held captive. All that talk about how love makes you stronger, but the second you see that elf girl in pain, you completely lost yourself. Seems to me that love's got a tighter grip on you than those chains round your wrists. So I'll do you a favor and set you free. I hope you liked my Finnegran impersonation. When she is being tortured by Finnegran's Ice Vein spell, Callum runs to her and cups her face in his hands. This scene is horrific and was a genuine scare on my first watch, but it cannot be ignored that Callum was the one to touch her face first, even if the circumstances were not so romantic. We of course all know that Callum did dark magic to save her life, putting his own life on the line to do so, but at the very end of that episode, we of course get one of the most tender and soft hugs in the entire show. Notice how Rayla reciprocated the face touch and the hug? Both of these actions were done by Callum first. And after that, the moments are just never ending. In the season finale, Callum places a hand on her shoulder when she's underwater, a scene that I admittedly wished had gone a little bit differently. I kinda wished that Rayla had taken the breath, because she trusted Callum's magic. But trauma is much different than fear. It's hard to overcome. Plus, she did eventually come to help either way, therefore trusting his magic in the end after all. And the very last frame of Rayllum in Season 5 is them holding hands and giving each other soft, hopeful looks. As soon as Season 6 begins, Rayla begins to let Callum confide in her again. At first, she didn't really take his concerns about Erebus very seriously, likely remembering him asking her to kill him, but eventually in the first episode, she does start taking things seriously when he runs into her room at the middle of the night. This is the first time we've seen them so close again, confiding in one another, touching one another, and just talking. It was a beautiful start to the Rayllum season. We see her offering her protection to him, as well as she asks him if he wants her to do the swap for him. He probably should have said yes. But Callum, you know what, man? I get ya. I feel immortal with my blanket too, even though it was Rayla's to begin with. At the very end of that episode, Callum straight up falls asleep on her back. If that doesn't say comfort and trust, I don't know what else does. And now we get to my favorite Rayllum episode in the entire show. The episode literally named after them. The Frozen Ship. We see them work together, banter, and we see Callum catch Rayla after she slips on the evil black ice. And for the first time, the hint that they might kiss again begins to show, as they slowly lean in as the music swells. Though quite cliche, especially with how it was interrupted, it was a gorgeous scene. You know what? I don't mind Rayla being put in cliche romantic situations. You know? They're cliche for a reason. They work. As the episode progresses, Rayla begins to read a diary in the frozen ship left behind by Her Excellency Captain Esmeralda Skal. This diary was basically the Season 6 version of Amaya's lesson from Season 5. The words in the diary speak of how Skal left her partner, Conrad, behind to scour the world for treasure and magical relics, somewhat analogous to how Rayla left Callum to hunt for Viren, though Skal's leave is much more selfish, I will say. Either way, Rayla reads the regretful words of Skal and realizes just how much she can relate to them. How much she misses Callum, missed Callum. How much her journey separated them, keeping them apart. She risked losing the best thing she had ever had, just like how Skal realized that Conrad was the greatest treasure that she could ever desire, more so than anything a mere journey could provide. Love. Love is a powerful thing in the Dragon Prince. I want you to remember that I said that. Those with a true heart can shift the wills of anybody. Once Callum arrives, Rayla, embarrassed, sort of lashes out at Callum, but it's quickly resolved. And it was kind of funny. But what is not resolved is the fact that Callum's bedding plunged into the water during their journey, so they only have one sleeping bag. Rayla, ever so graciously, asks Callum if he wants to just share the blanket with her. It wasn't really that big of a deal, right? Well, as we've seen before with Rayla's initiations, much like the stargazing scene, Callum's confusion still lingers and comes back every now and then. He very awkwardly declines, but after a while of sleeping in the cold Arctic air, it starts to get to him. But before that though, Callum shares with Rayla a story about his birth father, Damien, an action that does not go unappreciated by the elf. Once Callum tries to sleep though, Rayla notices his shuddering breath and tells him not to be stupid. Even when they're in bed together, Rayla is respectful of his boundaries and simply says goodnight, and it probably would have stayed that way had it not been for these two schemers. We all know what they did, putting Rayllum into a position where they were closer than ever before. So close that Rayla could feel his warm breath on her face. There is a lot to unpack from this scene. First of all, Callum's awkwardness. You can tell his mind is racing. His eyes say everything. But Rayla is just so patient and respectful to him, so soft and so calming. The way she had been since Season 4, when she realized he needed time to gather his thoughts about her. Never once does she break that streak of patience. Never once does she overstep her boundaries to a cautionable degree. Rayla was always waiting for him. And now, as she reaches for his hand, Callum's eyes begin to literally water, a million thoughts flowing through his brain per second, no doubt. Confusion mixed with yearning. He doesn't pull away, but he doesn't know what's appropriate. Should he try to kiss her? What does he do? Well, Rayla answered that question for him by placing his hand on her cheek for him, holding his gaze and holding his hand, just as Esmeralda Skal yearned to do with Conrad. Once Rayla did that, any and all of Callum's inhibitions in that moment went flying out the window. His expression softens. Rayla closes her eyes, and Callum pulls her in. Notice that? Even now, when she's sure that he would kiss her, she lets him initiate. She doesn't lean in to close that gap at all. Callum is pulling her face towards his own with his own hand. Even now, Rayla is giving him a way out, letting him do what he needs, what he wants. Sadly, though, the topic of dark magic was on the tip of his tongue. He knew he had to tell her what he did before he could commit to kissing her again. Yet again, showing just how mature both of them had become. Though there was no kiss, the discussion about dark magic and the greater good is also immensely important. While at the time of me writing this script we don't know exactly what the context of these lines will be, there is no doubt that it was still important in their present timeline. Notice how when Rayla gets upset with him for using dark magic, it isn't because of morality. It isn't because it's wrong, as Callum assumed she would say, but rather, Rayla is upset because dark magic hurts him. A huge change from the younger Rayla, whose disapproval came more from the morality of dark magic rather than Callum's own safety. Callum decides to tell her why he used dark magic, saying he did it for her, that he would do anything for her, and we can see the conflict etched on Rayla's face. I don't know who animated this scene, but whoever did it, you have my respect. The amount of emotion in their expressions here is insane. It's so good. Rayla tells Callum that if he ever has to choose between herself and the greater good, that he needed to do the right thing and make that sacrifice. Moments later, after they escape the burning ship, Callum tells her that in return, she has to promise to kill him if Erebos possesses him again, to which she now agrees to, realizing the seriousness of his request. Phew, that was a lot for one episode, but we aren't done yet. Moving on, they reach the Starscraper and learn about the prophecy. And once they learn about the prophecy, Callum persuades Rayla to actually attempt it. He plays it off as wanting to help the Celestial Elves to bring the heavens back to them, but his primary goal is actually helping Rayla with her family. When he hears the prophecy and hears the lines, "the heavens will adorn them," he realizes that the reward for completing it was the corona of the heavens. Once they complete the prophecy, which of course was filled with tons of small Rayla moments, one in particular regarding the trust they had built up yet again, playing a key role in their actions, the reward is presented. We all know how the scene goes, but what I think is amazing is just how correct Callum is about her. He knows her more than she knows herself, I think.
Why didn't you tell me?
'Cause I know you, Rayla. If I'd told you, you would have refused to go because you never do anything for yourself.
The hug Rayla gave him was nothing short of incredible. That little whimper was so cute. Callum, still a little awkward, hugs her back, but that awkwardness would phase out completely very, very soon. Because now we're moving on to episode 6. The final episode that we will discuss in detail in this video, because it is the final episode before Rayllum becomes official yet again. And I think you all know what I'm about to talk about. The Star Truth Ritual. Rayla being Callum's one deep truth, the star within him. Just as a bit of an FYI, this portion of the video is going to be my own interpretation of events, so let me know how you interpreted this scene down in the comments below. To me, on top of the magical side of things, this scene is Callum realizing once and for all that he does truly love Rayla, that he always had loved Rayla, even in her absence. The one deep truth within him was that love for her, that love that had been hidden away by his own regretful, emotional walls. Up until this point, those walls, although weakened over time, still remained. We saw it in how Callum returned her hug in just the episode prior. But now, once Callum realizes his one deep truth, his love for Rayla, those walls crumbled and were completely vaporized. As soon as he returns to the Starscraper, cleansed of dark magic, he gives Rayla the softest looks and the most tender hug I've seen yet. Look at the way he just melts into it. And of course, this leads up to their kiss. Callum wanting to redo that night was absolutely masterful writing, especially if my interpretation of the Star Truth Ritual is the correct one. Oh, and once again, Callum is the initiator. He always was. And now we're all caught up to when Rayllum became canon again. So, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a ton of fun to make, and it was a ton of fun going through all those old seasons again to watch all those moments, and finding old screenshots from Devin Gill, and interviews from Aaron Has and others. If you guys like this video, please make sure to, well, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Make sure to join my Discord server if you want to discuss more about TDP with tons of other fans. We have nearly 400 members now. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.